the figure of the sourcing hero exists in many contexts and many different places. For us, the sourcing hero is the person, or more often the team is the hero, that is able to deliver a critical product or service to meet a business need at the right time and the best price.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast. I'm your host, Catherine. And today I've got a really interesting guest bringing a completely different perspective to our conversation today. I've got Edmund Zagorin, the CEO and founder of BidOps. Hi, Edmund. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Catherine. Thanks for having me on.
So I said that you've got a completely different perspective for us today because I will say I tend to have procurement practitioners on, procurement leaders, and you have the procurement background just kind of in a different perspective. So you used to be an analyst, right?
That's correct. Yeah, I started in procurement as an analyst and also spent some time as a consultant.
So your time as an analyst and a consultant kind of led you through the process of creating BidOps, the software that solves particular problems within procurement, right?
Yeah, and actually, BidOps focuses on strategic sourcing. That's one of our primary focus.
Okay, we'll get to more of that later, just, setting the scene for everybody. And I wanted to ask you, since we are in very interesting times, what with the election happening last week and this entire year, every month there was something. How has the pandemic and perhaps any of the social and cultural issues this year, how has that affected BidOps?
Well, yeah, so I do think that the pandemic has affected everyone, and BidOps is no exception. In the beginning of the year, we had two offices, one in San Francisco, the other in Atlanta. And as people have been working from home, it's just been made more sense to kind of pursue that remote work strategy more fully. The other, I think, big change is just our customers are working from home as well. And so helping teams do go lives where previously, we might have come on site to meet people face to face, but now doing these fully remote, fully digital go lives. It's actually been interesting to see there's been some improvement in just efficiency and the fewer steps, faster time to get sourcing projects out the door, which I think is aligned with the fact that in a lot of cases, sourcing teams are being asked to do more with less, particularly as the need to source things like PPE has grown. You're seeing that sourcing teams have, in some cases, seen their project load close to double without significant growth at headcount. And so that, I think, has been something we've seen as well, that our customer success team has done a great job supporting. And I think in terms of the economic situation, different industries are affected differently. If you're in the toilet paper business, then, COVID's been great for you, provided you're in the consumer toilet paper business as opposed to the toilet paper business that fuels businesses. And we work with a number of life sciences and pharma companies, many of which are involved actively in the drug discovery process, hopefully, fingers crossed, helping us get a vaccine. And so it's been really just awesome to help support that process for our customers.
And it's really cool that you guys get to see kind of the back end of something that is happening and live, and, talking heads on news are talking about the vaccine every day, and you're kind of seeing the inside of it where they're sourcing everything that they need. That's so cool.
Yeah. I think it's, of course, we mostly just, when we meet with our customers, we kind of hear what they're using BidOps to do. And it's great to kind of hear their stories. When the pandemic started, one of the things that was kind of a news story that wasn't really that widely reported, but definitely was something we noticed quite a bit, was that most FDA-approved drugs have a set of API chemicals, which are the approved chemicals that can be used in the drug manufacturing formula. And about 90% of those actually come from Wuhan in China, which is also where the coronavirus comes from.
Oh my God.
So at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a flurry of sourcing activity to develop alternative sources for these critical API chemicals. And this was I remember when the US Senate held a hearing on this topic about the number of just over-the-counter drugs that would be affected by potentially a ruling that might limit the imports. This was back when people thought the coronavirus might be transmitted through packaging or surfaces, and it wasn't really understood. So people weren't kind of clear that it was mostly transmitted through the air. And so there was a conversation that like actually the process of discovering and producing drugs might go through a pretty dramatic shift globally as a result of that change.
I can't imagine all the other stories and experiences that you're hearing from your customers. That one in particular is pretty cool because of, these things that you hear on the news and then you hear it directly from your customer. And that's interesting. It's interesting line of work that you have. I'm curious, have you heard from some of your customers if they've been adjusting to, remote and going all digital with their projects? Like, how has that been? And has that been lagging, or did they just step right up to the plate you guys have?
It's been really interesting. I think that we spoke with one customer that has really industrial supply chain that involves a lot of physical goods and components and raw materials, and even a couple true commodities. And for that customer, there's no remote work for like a factory assembly line. Like there's no way for that to go kind of fully remote. But a lot of the business processes associated with that same process, actually, it's a tremendous struggle to fully digitize or virtualize them just due to the configuration of the IT systems in which those processes are managed. And so you've probably heard of the concept of a digital twin or a kind of virtual process that mirrors a physical process in the manufacturing or in the physical world. And so what's been interesting is that in some cases, it's been necessary to actually port data from an on-premises database into a cloud environment so that people can access it via a VPN when they're working from home. So that if they're managing a sourcing project, they can gain access to the same data that they would be able to if they were in the office. So the physical manufacturing process, which of course has to be sterilized and people have to put down floor indicators for social distancing and all of these new requirements, can actually proceed. Because if the factory can't open safely, then the remote element of the process is for naught. I would say in our customers, it's a hybrid of kind of being able to go remote efficiently in some areas, and there being some extra steps and extra setup to do it. I think overall, and this has actually even been true of us, and it's interesting, we started as a remote first company. We then centralized into offices in particular cities, and now we're remote again. And I would say that for us, because we operate in multiple different cities in the US, we've always had as a team culture a big celebratory thing around getting together. So we have these team summits that are an important part of working at BitOps and building the technology that we're building. And so we've had to be, and we've seen this with our customers as well, just much more intentional about building culture, celebrating wins, having good camaraderie. And so that's something that we're seeing sourcing teams think about a little bit more, how to recognize excellence and also just how to enjoy each other's company while we're doing this important work.
We've had to figure out the same exact thing. How do we still cultivate the culture and get together? And we do a retreat every year, which this year was over Zoom, just, not the same. We've had team happy hours, which has been really great. But I can imagine there are a lot of people that are not doing as well and not managing through the remote work. And I think that a lot of people, that's like, there's so many more podcasts. That's how we kind of came out of this is, I've been wanting to do a podcast, but the Sourcing Hero is about empowering procurement and bringing stories, bringing perspectives from every corner of the sourcing and supply chain world. And what I love about it is that there are more people checking in digitally and people are like really responding to the stories that they're hearing. And the question that streamlines the entire series together is, what is a sourcing hero to you? And the coolest thing about that is everybody's, because they're from different corners of the industry, they always have a different answer. So please tell everybody your perspective on the sourcing hero.
Yeah, I think that the figure of the sourcing hero exists in many contexts and many different places. For us, the sourcing hero is the person, or more often the team is the hero that is able to deliver a critical product or service to meet a business need at the right time and the best price. And I think that that is early in my career, I worked in film and video production. And there's an old saying in film and video, the sound recording, if it's perfect, no one notices it. And like you notice, if you've ever seen a movie that has poor sound quality or poor sound recording, you notice it. You're like, oh, what's going on? But no one ever, very few people watch a movie and are like, wow, that sound recording was just beautiful. You're looking at the acting, you're looking at the lighting, you're looking at other aspects of the film. And I think that in a similar vein, the heroism of sourcing is often when it's working, you don't notice it. It's just the right stuff is showing up at the right places and the business seems to have enough money in the bank. And I think that what's so important about sourcing heroes is that they deliver on a project basis and they deliver at scale. It's not just about coming through in the clutch. It's about being that reliable, trusted partner to the business who understands the strategic vision, is not trying to step over a buck to pick up a penny, is having that kind of holistic, value-oriented, total cost of ownership understanding about what the business needs, but also is kind of the dog behind the beware of dog sign in terms of keeping people that might be trying to sell a little bit more than they deliver, keeping them in line and making sure that the business is getting good value for all of the relationships with other entities in the supply chain.
That's an incredible answer. And we have not received that one yet. There's a lot there to touch on. And I heard you speak to TCO. And I remember in our first conversation that you were trying to solve for that when you were, was it during the consultancy phase when you were developing the idea for BidOps?
So I think it's just worth probably mentioning that what BidOps does is we use a machine learning model to help people create intelligent first offers that can streamline a sourcing process by starting at the finish line, really starting with the outcome in mind. And one of the benefits of that process is that it allows teams to do very, very efficient value analysis and total cost of ownership benchmarking. In terms of my personal career, I was doing this as a consultant, helping. Kind of an easy example is like when you're buying a car. If you have a choice between a gas-powered car and an electric car, the gas-powered car might cost a little bit less on the price tag, but you're paying for the gasoline. And so the total cost of ownership includes that ongoing financial cost. It is truly money out of your pocket, so it's not a soft cost or a kind of a preference. It's just not realized at the moment that you buy the vehicle. So that cost essentially is deferred over the lifetime of the vehicle every time you fuel up at the pump. The electric vehicle might cost a little bit more, but it actually saves money in the long term. That fundamental framework can be applied to many, many different categories in sourcing. So as a consultant, what I was doing was actually helping people design evaluation frameworks that allowed them to realize the long-term savings and then negotiate and prioritize that upfront in the process. And that really kind of framed why BidOps kind of came in with this new approach to negotiations where you start out with the most desired outcome and then work backwards from that. Because as a consultant, what I kept finding helping customers was that people would get offers from suppliers that differed in ways that made it very, very difficult to compare. And that created these kind of deliberative cycles where people would discuss and opine, but it was difficult to actually quantify the differences that were being discussed. And so the intelligent first offer that takes the most desired outcome as its point of departure can actually help everyone get on the same page across different, not just suppliers, but different award configurations, different award options. And it takes all of that total cost of ownership and value analysis in mind so that you're actually negotiating over value instead of price.
Wow. So that's BidOps in a nutshell.
Yeah. I mean, it really did come out of this idea of total cost of ownership and value analysis being fundamental to the future of procurement. and the idea that procurement is always looking to play that role of a trusted advisor and align with the strategic priorities of the business. There's a great book by Kelly Barner and John Hanson called Procurement at the Crossroads. And one of the points that this book makes is that one of the reasons why business leaders in some cases may have a negative view of procurement is because it is not a core business purpose of most companies to save money. And so a lot of business leaders will say, we're trying to grow revenue. We're trying to expand our market. We're trying to compete against X, Y, or Z company. In that top priority, saving money is not listed in that kind of core to the business function, but it is the KPI that procurement is most usually graded against. And so that creates this kind of tension or misalignment. And by being value focused and total cost of ownership focused, procurement can actually align with the strategic priorities of the C-suite, of the CEO, of the corporate board, and deliver this really powerful, delightful experience that the business actually is looking for and needs to have, because no one likes to get taken to the cleaners. No one likes to get a bad deal or go through a negotiation process and wind up with an undesirable contract. And most people in the business are not professional negotiators. They don't have the frameworks, templates, skills to get that good outcome. So procurement can play that really important fundamental role, but taking value and total cost of ownership in mind is critical to that mission.
Right. And I love your point about the business procurement being able to align with the business better through the total cost of ownership instead of the cost savings. That gives them a little bit more to stand on, right? Because they can relate to that profitability, preserving profitability as a company that's trying to grow or expand, and revenue is always the bottom line. I made a note, which this is all in the same vein. I made a note here in our first conversation that running efficient price negotiations will become the most important capability in procurement. From our first conversation, I quoted you there. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I think that when we look at the jobs to be done for procurement, and you can think about this as any procurement organization should be good at fill in the blank. What price negotiations encompass is it's about setting a price for the right value. And so total cost of ownership is key, value analysis is key, but at the end of the day, you have to put a number on the purchase order and there's an invoice, there's a transaction. And if we think about the past 10 years of procurement transformation, a lot of it has focused on procure to pay, the P2P provider space, and marketplaces and ERP integrated solutions. If we think about the biggest opportunity that procurement currently has over the next 10 years, it's all about supplier relationships, understanding them better, creating data around them, setting KPIs around them, and understanding how those drive business outcomes. And price negotiations are the task set within that framework that encompasses or touches all of those processes. So if you were to optimize for one process improvement over the next decade, you would end up having to change enough of the underlying infrastructure to enable efficient price negotiations. And so I would make the case, maybe a bit controversial, that optimizing for efficient price negotiations is kind of the most exciting digital transformation priority in procurement.
Well, and you've placed your bet within the business that you're running right now for the last few years. You're running it and you're doing it. I love that you're trying to solve the problem that arose in your work. And you've got a lot to say and so much of an opinion about where procurement is going, what we need to do to continue to succeed. Obviously, procurement's in the spotlight right now, and the way that the industry is responding is huge. And I'd like to hear from you what advice you have to up and coming procurement right now, someone who's trying to keep up the pace and respond as best they can. Any words of wisdom?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that for people who are just getting started in the procurement profession or are trying to learn more about it, the opportunity is really unique for people that are early in their career in procurement precisely because of digital transformation. And so I met with one procurement team earlier this year who has, and this is the first I'd ever heard of it, a reverse mentoring program where they actually had the younger members of their team mentor some of the older category managers and socialize concepts in digital transformation.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And I think that there's this recognition that new entrants to the procurement profession bring, in many cases, some digital knowledge that can be useful to the organization as a whole in a way that is important, in a way that just years of experience, which are certainly, obviously the currency of what makes you a good procurement leader, but increasingly the talent profile of procurement is changing. And it's a little bit less about relationships and Rolodex and category knowledge and a little bit more about being outcome oriented and understanding efficient tooling, understanding building systems and processes and scaling those up and then making them more efficient. And so people that are analytical, that have kind of frameworks or backgrounds in engineering, mathematics, computer science, procurement's hungry for those skills right now in a way that it wasn't, I don't think, perhaps 10 or 20 years ago. And so I think that if you're just getting started in procurement, it's an exciting time. The thing that I think is important to do from a learning perspective is to realize that there's a rich history, not just in procurement, but in procurement digitization. Look up the stories of companies like Free Markets and Ariba and CombineNet and SciQuest. Look up the digital journeys that were begun in the 90s, even the late 80s, the early 2000s. There's a wealth of literature on the internet about how procurement has changed, what has been successful, what hasn't. And I think that coming in and having a opinion that everything, needs to change immediately is not particularly helpful in most contexts. There are evolved processes that do exist for a reason, but also bringing that fresh perspective and challenging assumptions, I think is a contribution that people that are early in their career can make in procurement in a way that will actually be appreciated and for which there's an audience today in a way that there hasn't been before. The last thing I'll just briefly mention is that one of the things that I noticed coming into procurement is that a lot of processes that you get socialized with are pretty linear in the way that you learn them. In other words, you're told, okay, first we do this, then we do this, then we do this, and here are the steps, here are the milestones, and you have to follow this process exactly, and here are the things that you use at each step of the process to measure success. And I think that, previously it was kind of experienced or seasoned category leaders or sourcing consultants that would come in and say, actually, the process is nonlinear. First we'll talk to suppliers, then we'll ask some questions, then we might ask for a couple quotes, then we might actually go back and look at the specifications. And that nonlinearity in the process is what drives subject matter experts to come in and actually be a kind of ride as a co-pilot or a trusted advisor for more strategic or just higher value, higher spend threshold projects. And I think that increasingly systems in procurement are moving towards nonlinearity. So whereas beginners in procurement used to be pretty badly punished for making mistakes, if you run a linear process and you get to step 3 and you've missed something in step 1 and then have to start over, you kind of go, that's frustrating. But increasingly, the systems and technology in procurement is adjusting to understand and align with the nonlinearity inherent in an optimal process, where it's not step by step, but people are more iterative. People are more okay with having kind of a beginner's mind about the sourcing process in general, treating some projects as a discovery process, other projects as a well-defined and mostly automatable process. And the processes where there's more learning are going to be the processes that are more valuable to the organization as a whole. And I think that that's where people that don't know a lot and can ask some of the kind of beginners questions that end up being really interesting and valuable can make a huge contribution, provided that they do so in a respectful manner and provided that they understand that the changes that are happening are going to be difficult in a lot of the organizations that they're joining. And that needs to be taken into account.
Do you think that there's a world, in the next 5, 10 years where we're going to see some procurement majors at universities?
Absolutely. I mean, I think supply chain, I believe in a number of universities, I think Texas A&M and Michigan State has degree programs for supply chain. I believe they at very least have master's programs. BidOps actually, I went to Michigan and we have an academic advisor who's a professor in the B school at Michigan and teaches in the MBA program. And he teaches a negotiation class and a supply chain optimization class, Damian Bile. And increasingly, people that are interested in leading operations organizations at major companies are going to get at least some background in the analytics approach. And then I think what you'll see more from an academic standpoint is not learning specific processes, but learning how to build processes, like learning what the components of processes are and how to put them together for your organization and what criteria or meta criteria to use as like essentially a determinant of, is this a good process or are there ways to make it better?
Our operations team will love to listen to this episode because you are speaking their language right now. Kaylee, shout out to you, Emily and Crystal. They're probably going to rewind that back and listen to that part again. I've got one more thing I wanted to ask you. And we did have a moment earlier where intermittently we've talked about BidOps, but I'm curious about next year. And I know that there's still a lot of unknowns, but what's in the future for BidOps? What are you guys planning for the next year?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that we're pretty heads down right now, just doing what we're doing and helping more companies experience the kind of delight feeling of having something that's very frustrating be just done very quickly and efficiently. And so bringing that to other industries has definitely been not just a priority for us from a business standpoint, but also just a lot of fun. The work we've been doing in the automotive space over the past quarter has brought us a lot of joy. We have a new partnership with Holman ARI, which is a major fleet management company. I believe they're either the largest or the second largest in North America. And working with their leadership and the leadership in their auto truck business has just been an absolute delight, and seeing some of the wins that they've been getting. Over the next year, one of the priorities from a technology standpoint is actually taking our machine learning model and abstracting it away from our software product to provide additional value in the form of reporting. So one of the things that you're probably aware of if you've looked at our website or spoken with one of our representatives is that BidOps is a software product. So you use it to run strategic sourcing events. And if you want to use the machine learning aspect of it, then you have to use the software product to kind of get at that benchmarking and forecasting module. What we've been able to do actually is to take our machine learning model and train it on data from an entire supply chain. This model can now accurately classify a line item as shouldn't negotiate. It can estimate the amount of savings for each line item. And it will do this in a unique way based on whether or not the line item is sole source, if there's competition for it based from multiple suppliers. And perhaps most importantly, it componentizes the price based on lead time, minimum order quantity, and other column attributes. And it localizes and chronologizes the price based on the time of year and the geography. So we believe that price negotiations from a data standpoint is a hard problem. We've spent the past couple of years really laser focused on this problem from a data standpoint. And it's taken quite a long time, maybe longer than you might imagine, to actually get this machine learning model working correctly so that it can benchmark and create meaningful estimates and meaningful recommendations on price. But now that it's working, we can actually abstract it away from our software so that we can take an entire ERP system worth of data and very, very quickly estimate the savings that could be gained from running sourcing events. And so what this enables our customers to do is to actually pitch the value of procurement better to their business partners. So they can go to their stakeholders in supply chain or in manufacturing or even in the finance organization, go right to the CFO and say, look, if we run this number of processes, here's how much money we could return to the bottom line of the business. And this is validated by this machine learning model. And by the way, this model has been audited by these third parties, and it's verified and validated by these experts. And so you don't have to trust the provider. You can actually look at all of this proof and all of this data to see that sourcing can make a really meaningful contribution. So let us at it. We think that's really exciting. And so from a technology standpoint, we have 2 customers to date that have executed this, and it's been a resounding success. So we'll begin scaling out that offering as actually a separate commercial offering, separate from our software.
That's amazing. You're essentially solving for X, procurement's one of their biggest issues is the perception of the C-suite of procurement not having, a valuable impact on the business. And you're basically saying, okay, yes, we are valuable. And here's the number to the tune of, however many millions of dollars. That is really exciting. And I'm going to be watching your social and your website to see when that comes out. Do you have a name for it? Is there a particular product name?
It's still pre-named. So if anyone has any suggestions, we're open to it.
Sorcery, magic. I don't know. It's like what you just explained sounds like a miracle to me. And I think a lot of other people in procurement would agree. That's very cool.
We appreciate that. Our engineers work super hard and put a lot of effort into this. And so it's definitely to their credit that our customers have been able to achieve this.
Awesome. Well, I wish you and the whole BidOps team the best of luck with that and continued success with your software. And thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your insights on the industry, where we're going, and just all of that technical wisdom that you have inside your brain. Thank you for sharing.
Catherine, thanks so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure chatting, and it's a great pod. We're fans, and keep it up.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And maybe next time we'll be talking about the new tool, the new magic number sourcing tool, whatever you're going to call it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think benchmarking and optimization, we think are going to be the key kind of feature elements from a technology standpoint within the price negotiations space. And so I imagine this will be something we'll be talking about as a community of practitioners for years to come.
So exciting. Well, thanks again. Until next time.
All right. Take care, Catherine.